This pitch deck raised $1.5 million. Let's take a look at what works and what could be improved. First up, let's look at the company's cover slide. I love the simplicity of it. It's just a URL and a product validation platform. I wish there was a little bit more information on here, like, I don't know, the size of the round or a little bit more about what the company actually did. But as far as opening up a story goes, this works great. Slide 2 is all about traction. They've helped 1,000 companies, they've made $50 million worth of sales and built a huge ecosystem in consumer tech. All of that is great. Although, as a traction slide, I really wish that this had like a graph or a chart in it. Like, helping 1,000 customers is great, but over how much time? Is that accelerating? Investors don't invest in a single data point. They invest in a trend. So you may as well show that trend. Slides 3 to 6 are all about the problem. So in a nutshell, the company says that every year millions of products are launched. 80% of those products fail. The way of doing the testing doesn't work. And there are specific problems related to how product viability and go-to-market testing is done. Now, together, these 4 slides actually tell a really powerful story. What I wish, though, is that it wasn't 4 slides. You could very easily tell this whole story in just 1 slide, maybe 2. The way I often think about the problem part of the slide deck is think about what the problem is and think about what the impact of the problem is. And the company actually does a really good job of that here. It explains what the problem is, i.e. it's hard to do market validation. And then it explains what the actual specifics are. It also talks a little bit about the impact. So 80% fail. Now, I think if you put all of these things together, you can reduce these 4 slides to 2 slides very easily. Show what the problem is and show what the impact of the problem is. And that takes care of that. Then you can go on to talking about your solution. Slides 7 through 10, the company talks about its value proposition and its solution. So in this case, it's talking about how its approach does a different take on making market validation possible for early stage startups. On slide 8, the company brings the receipts, 86% accuracy. Now, if that is far above the market standard, I don't know, I presume it is, then that's a really good efficacy number to show like, hey, this is what we're doing. And look, it really works. Really good storytelling. On slides 9 and 10, the company really talks about its solution it brings. So it does both concept validation, i.e. is this product a good idea in the first place? And then it does pricing validation. It kind of does both, right? So it does the, is this a good idea? And are people willing to pay what we need to charge for it in order to make this product? And those 2 validation pieces are actually really important for product development. And so involving both of those in this slide deck is really smart. And on slide 11, it says what it does. It says that it works, but now it shows how it works. So the company shows the analytics and the insights and the analysis and all that kind of stuff. And that's really awesome. And by doing it this way, instead of having like these massive screenshots, is that it's very clear what you want the investors to look at. And this shows off really well what the product actually does. Very cleverly done. Slide 12, Prelaunch.com really shows its vision. It says, hey, every product should have a pre-launch phase with market research. And so in that is actually showing its hand for how big it thinks its market is going to be for everything it's about to do. For an investor pitch, this is really helpful in order to really get a good sense of how big is this market and are you going to go after the right market. On slide 13, the company does a little detour into like, hey, we do all this stuff, but not making the wrong product is also good for the environment. I think it's a good point to make, and I think some investors do care about climate tech and the environment. But in this particular context, it feels a little bit out of left field. It's like you're telling this very specific story about reducing financial waste, and then you're adding an additional environmental layer to this. I don't really know what the voiceover is that the founders do when they tell this story, and maybe this is tied in well, but on the pitch deck itself, it feels a little bit out of left field. The core story of this pitch is not about the environment, and so pulling it in as like an added bonus, maybe that could work, but in this case, it feels a little bit like a distraction. On slide 14, the company continues to talk about its traction. Now, these traction numbers are really, really good, but again, I would have loved to see this as charts. As an investor, what I really want to see, yes, I want to see the results, but I also want to see how quickly these results are growing. I appreciate 4 months is not a lot of data, but in general, whenever I see cumulative numbers like this, I become a little bit suspicious. I want to dig into them immediately. So it's a very good idea to make sure to show how growth happens over time. On slide 15, the company is showing its pricing plans, which is really important to get a good sense for where in the market this company is actually positioned. Now, having pricing plans ranging from $0 to $400 a month, that feels a little bit complex. And my curiosity would be, if you've only had 400 customers, would it be possible to kill off some of these plans? So you're able to focus your customer development and your product development on more specific niches. But having said that, this does the trick. On slide 16, the company talks about 3 big trends. And really, this is the why now part of the story. Personally, I would have probably been even more explicit and just said why now at the top of this slide, but ultimately this slide accomplishes the same thing. Which is why I'm a little bit confused that the next slide is actually the why now slide. Honestly, I don't think this is the why now slide. The previous one is the why now slide. These are your value props. And so it's a little bit confusing to have them mixed up like that, and more importantly, the value propositions are actually sprinkled throughout the rest of the deck. So I think this slide could actually be superfluous, you get rid of it. The company has its team slide as slide 18. Now, this is not a particularly good team slide, to be super honest. There's just not enough information on here to let me know whether or not there's good founder market fit. There's only first names, which makes it very hard to search for them on LinkedIn, and the background for each of these team members is pretty flimsy. And so I'm like, I want to understand why this team and no other team could do this company, and this slide doesn't really accomplish that. So there's quite a lot of room for improvement here. Next up, the company does its ask and use of funds slide. So it's saying it's raising 1.5 million, that's totally cool, but then it says it's doing that at a $10 million valuation. Now there's a couple of problems with that. One, the fact that it's a round with a valuation makes me think that this is a priced round, which is totally doable, but in that case, you need to have a term sheet from another investor. Like otherwise, this is actually all up for negotiation, and it's just completely pointless to put any terms in a pitch deck. Now, if you have a lead investor who's already invested $750K and done the negotiations, sure, then you can put that. But in that case, you would typically say a little bit more about who is already invested and things like that. The use of funds also isn't very good here. Like sales team hire, product development, and marketing, sure, but to what end? I need to understand, are you hiring the right people to accomplish the right goals? And there's nothing in here that says anything about the goals. A much better way of doing the use of funds would be, by a certain date, I will hit so and so many customers, which will give us this and this much revenue, and our customer acquisition cost will be this, right? If you do it that clearly with numbers and clearly show your goals and metrics for what you think success is going to look like, that makes it much easier for me as an investor to understand, oh, this team really knows what it's doing. It's raising 1.5 million and it's trying to reach some reasonable goals with that 1.5 mil. That makes it much easier for me to go, okay, I need to have a better conversation with these founders to figure out whether or not I want to invest. We've made it to the end of the pitch deck. The purpose of a final slide really is to have one last chance to really place in your investors' minds what it is that you want them to walk away from as they kind of finish reading the pitch deck. The final step to any launch is actually a really good and tight slogan. And I think the fact that they introduced their contact details and all that kind of stuff in the final slide also does really well. Overall, I actually really like the pre-launch deck. It hasn't gone into too much detail about how it does things, and all of this is kind of tied to metrics. I want to see better metrics for what has happened so far, and I want to see better milestones for what the company has envisioned for coming up into the future. If the company had added both of those things to this slide deck, its fundraising journey would have probably been a lot easier. If you want to learn more about pitching and fundraising, follow me and check out pitch.guy.